Desktop, and then I'll share screen. So if you want to do it with another person, you can, or you can use the computer next to you to look at the BIOS, and then you can use your computer at your station to record the answer. There are two parts to the lab. We are going to do the BIOS part, and then you are going to do the CPU-Z and just install and run. Okay. So as soon as you start your computer, you are going to press the key F2, and you want to hit it a couple of times, right? You don't want it to load to Windows, because after it goes through the boot process, when it starts loading OS, you already gone too far. So if it loads Windows, then you gotta restart it again, right? Shut it off, restart it, and then press F2 to go to BIOS. So put your finger on F2, then you're gonna reboot or boot, and press F2 to go to setup for the Alienware. Okay. And I hope the IT team didn't put any password on these. Okay, good. So I'm gonna share screen in case anyone pop into Zoom. And then I'm gonna turn on my laptop for projection so you can see, and then I'll switch over to the system. Yeah, if I hit on there, that will be helpful. So we'll do the BIOS one today, and then we'll do the other one. Let me go back to modules so I can show you. It's actually labeled 4.2, and then we'll do the system information one next time. Okay. So let's do the CPU-Z, this one today. I know I did it backwards, but since you're here, we will just do this. And then the system information, you can also, if you're not here, you can also use, hi, how are you doing? You can also use your computer, okay? Now, the BIOS, you can also use your computer. The spec is just gonna be a little different. So we are gonna do lab 4.2, and if you just got started, you want to use the computer next to you to do the procedure, and you want to use your computer to record the answer, okay? So when you boot the computer next to you, as soon as you hit the power button, you wanted to press the F2 a couple of times or a few times until it gets into setup. And let me see, let me see if it's going to project it, okay? And when you press F2, yeah, that's why I thought it's not going to be able to pull it because it's not even at the driver level. So I'm going to switch camera on Zoom, and so maybe you can see it. Okay, so when we need to access BIOS, we just need to go to setup, and then when you go to setup, let me see if I'm able to get, hold on one second. Give me 1 minute, okay? I'll put the share screen back. Okay. So if you just got here, we are going to do lab 4.2 first, and then we will do 4.1 down the line on Wednesday. So today we are going to look at BIOS, which is going to be your basic input and output, everything that you install on your computer. All the components are going to be listed in BIOS, right? Such as your processor, your RAM, and so on. So you are going to use the computer next to you to go to BIOS, and then you are going to use your computer, your workstation, to access the lab and write down the information. Okay? So when you boot the computer next to you to access BIOS, or your computer at home, if you're doing it from home, you are going to look for a key. It's going to say the function key, which is F. And for our Alienware in the classroom, you are going to press F2. So as soon as you press the power to turn on that computer, you're going to hit F2 a few times. You're going to tap it until it gets into the setup. Okay? And 1 second, let me see. Hold on, let me check my settings for my. Let me see if it's able to pull. Okay, hold on. Let me disable my virtual background. And then, okay. So, when you enter BIOS, it's going to look something like this. I know you get a little glare and I'm unstable, right? Then you are going to see the options. Okay. This is the Alienware, so it's a little bit different than the one that you might be seeing at home. Okay. Now you're going to use your keyboard to be able to navigate. Usually there's some Dell that you're able to use the mouse where they actually integrate the full graphical user interface. And so in this one, you can just use your up and down arrow key and be able to navigate. Okay. So here you would see setup, and it will give you the general information about the CPU. So on the top, I know it's a little glary in here. Sorry, the people on Zoom. It will tell me the BIOS version. And the BIOS version here, I would see it's 1.0.0, right? Now, can you update the version? You can sure update the version, but you have to, what we call that flash BIOS. So you would go and you would download it from the Dell website or the Alienware website, and then you would put it on a USB, and then you would use that USB to transfer the new BIOS into it. But all your system comes with some kind of BIOS version. Now, when do I need to flash my BIOS? when you have an older system and if it doesn't recognize your some of the newer devices, let's say your solid state drive that you install, okay? So, and so you can flash it, but really, you know, that we would see that we need to flash it in the current system. So for those of you who are looking at this from home, I'm in the BIOS and I press F2 to be able to navigate to when I first boot the computer. It will tell me which key to set up. Some system, it will tell you to press delete, right, DEL, or some system, it depends on whether the type of board that you're using and the BIOS. So BIOS is stored into one of the chip, right? And what it's used EEPROM, which is writable ROM to be able, so when you install system components in your system, it's going to store that into the storage, which is then it's going to use that to give you the information about your components. Now, on the motherboard, it would use a little battery on the older system, or in the new one, it actually has a chip that it would use for power supply. So that way it would retain the information because, you know, any kind of memory usually needs some kind of power in order to retain it. So when you press F2, you would see the information, and if you look closer, it will tell you here in general. I have a processor. It's this one. Yours is a little different. I have an i9 on mine, and yours might have the i7 because the one that I'm using is a later version. It's clocking the CPU speed. You can see that it's at 3600 megahertz.
This is right.
Okay. Yeah, so yours is older but might be better, right? And I'm the 9th generation i9, which now is dated because now they have the 10th and the 11th generation. And so normally Intel would say like 9900K and which generation i9 and the processor. And this is the bench speed. So you are roughly under that when you're using your system for email, school, and so on. Then you also have a CPU ID, okay? And that will be the ID for your processor. The cache information is your level 1, 2, and 3 cache there. Some processor would only have L1. And if you have a processor that has L2, L3, and so on, oops, let me go back. Okay. You would see that it would have level 1 and then level 2 and level 3. You see the kilobyte size there? So in order to have L3, you have to have L2, and in order to have L2, you have to have L1. So those are different level caches, and also in the book when it talks about the CPU, it will have that. So you want a decent amount of size in the cache because the cache is it's a temporary location in the processor where it can store and queue your processes. So, you know, some program would also utilize cache, and most program would use RAM and processor cache, right? So what you see the size there. So for those of you who are recording this, you can use your own system at home if you have it. That might be a little different, but this is the one in the classroom. Okay. All right. So that's okay. Not a big deal. All right. Let me switch back to screen share, and so we can take a look at the instructions. So it asks you which BIOS version, right? We know that our BIOS version is 1.0.0. That's the one that comes with oh my gosh, I think Zoom just died on me. Oh, there. Okay, now it's better. I thought I closed it by accident. I'm sorry. Okay, so here is the BIOS version. We see that it's 1.0.0. Then we also see that the processor type and speed on mine, it shows that it's an Intel i9, and this is the 9900K. But on some of the students' computer, it's an Intel i7. That's an older version for the Alienware that we purchased. And then the speed for it, it's for mine, it's at 3600 megahertz. Okay. And so when you're buying processor, you wanted to take a look at the type of processor that you're getting. Intel uses board that supports Intel. So motherboard has to fit, the socket has to fit the processor. And this is the bench speed that they, you can go to Intel website and you put in the model and the CPU ID, it actually tells you. Okay. So most of the time, if we're not gaming, if we're not doing anything heavy duty, we are going to be at a little bit under that, right? So idle speed wise, and most of the regular execution is going to be a little below. But if you're designing, if you're gaming, if you're using animation, if you're creating animation, you want graphics and you want processor speed. Okay. The type of cache that we saw was L1, right? L2 and L3, and it gives you the kilobytes. So for L1, I'm at 512 kilobytes. It's the smallest. And then the L2, I'm at 2048, which is about 2 megs. Let me change that to the equal sign. Let me change this to red. And if you have a hard time seeing red, let me know. All right, the L3 has the largest, and that's going to be 16384 KB. So 16, like that's a lot, right? So what you can do is when you read the spec, you wanted to see what kind of cache it has and the size of the cache. Okay, and that's going to help with your processes. All right. Any question with this? So on the Alienware, you can also use the mouse and you can scroll down. So on the mouse, once we have that, it's also on the bottom of the list. It's gonna list the actual your hard disk drive. Okay. All right. So let's look at the next few questions. So the list of the storage HDD, and we're going to look at the storage. So I already see that I do have a Western Digital. So when you see WDC, that's your Western Digital. It has a Western Digital controller. Now, this is the one that is installed in the Alienware is going to be the HDD is WD. That's going to be your Western Digital 10EZEX. That's the model number, and so on, right? I'm not gonna write out the whole thing, but it's going to be 1,000 gigabytes. Okay. And so you have a summary of your HDD. Oops, sorry, lose cable. Okay, we're back. Sorry about that. And then on the, we have a solid state drive, which is gonna be on the M.2, okay? And the solid state drive is half of the size. So I have an SSD. That's gonna be it uses a NVMe or the M.2, right? So this is an M.2 PCI Express. This is the common one that you're gonna see in the market, and then you do have some hybrid ones. So most of the solid state is gonna use the M.2 slots. So we are going to be at 512 gigabyte, which is about half of the size of the HDD. And if you want, you can put down the model number and so on. So in the industry, when you do an inventory of your hardware for your system, you want to put down the model number and all of that. So in case that there's warranty that they will need to fix it, so Dell would send out, you know, you can create a support card, and then they would send out the actual device to replace. Then you have the capacity of your memory with your system memory. And in the system, I have about 32 gigs. So the Alienware have 32768 MB, which is approximately 32 gigs. And that's pretty much for most of the, you want the gaming system to have a decent size of RAM, right? And then the type of memory, speed. So when you buy memory, right, if I need to replace the memory on this, I want it to go with the equal or higher speed. So the speed for the memory is 2666 megahertz. Can I go with something faster? Sure, but it's just going to be at that slot. So it's the whatever the motherboard supports, that's going to be at least that. Okay, so if I get something that's higher speed, it's kind of like getting a sport car and drive it on a 60 miles per hour freeway, right? It's still not maximizing the capability of that sport car. So we wanted to make sure that, you know, it's equal. If you cannot find equal, we can go a little higher. Okay. So then we are going to move down to the advanced menu, and I'm going to stop share, and so I can show you what that looks like. Okay, so I use my keyboard to go to the advanced menu here, and then I would get something like this. Everybody sees on Zoom? Okay, a little glare because of the neon light that we have in here, but it will tell me that the Intel speech step, which is TM, is enabled. Okay, and then the speech shift is TM enabled. The Sata operation, so the first two options is for the processor, and it's going to be able to change speed, because you know how on the new processor you can turbo boost it, right? You can also speed step it. So we'll see some of that on the second part. Then your Sata operation, we enable RAID on, and RAID, later on we'll talk about RAID. RAID stands for redundancy array of disks, where we would group a set of hard drives together so we can have backup. On the Intel software guard, we would have software control, where that will be an extension for, you know, the processor storage and also the instructions for the processor. And so if you need to change any of these, you can use your arrow to go up and down, or in this case, we also can use our mouse to select, because the graphical user interface allows us to do that. Okay, so now let's go back to screen share. All right, so we are going to answer the question. It says, in the advanced menu, review the information and answer the following question. Does the processor has hyperthreading, and what type? So does yours include hyperthreading information? Yeah. Okay. Uh-huh. So on mine, right? So you, for the students, so you said it has enable. Did it say what type on yours?
Yeah, it says hyperthreading control.
Okay, so you have hyperthreading control, and that's enabled, right?
Yes.
Now, depending on the processor, as you can see, some will be different even though it's in the same Intel family, right? Like the one that the students have at the workstation, it's slightly different than the one I have. Now, and that would also include how the setup for it would be too. Okay, so let me see if I can change. Okay. On the virtualization, right? They should enable on yours because that's how we were able to run virtual machines. So in order to run virtual machine, yes, you want to enable the virtualization. Now, AMD is similar. If you don't enable virtualization, you cannot run your virtual machine. But out of the box, it's not, right? Like if you buy a system and turn it on, it's not. So anything after i5 is going to have the virtualization capability. i5 and 4. If you use an i3, there will not be a VM feature on an i3. Okay? So anything i5 and newer is going to be enabled. On the AMD side, anything that's after the A4, which you see AM3 and AM4 Plus and all of those have virtualization. Now, on the AMD, okay, I don't want to be biased, but on the AMD, whenever if you use nested virtualization, have you guys ever used nested virtualization? That means that I can run a virtual machine inside a virtual machine. I've done this 3 times and it was a little crashy, right? So I did that for the simulation for my Python for networking class. So you can run a virtual machine inside a virtual machine. That's called nested virtualization. On the AMD, that is a feature that AMD included. They later incorporated with the 10th generation and the 11th generation for the i5, i7 and i9, but it wasn't included before that for Intel. Just side notes, okay? All right, so we're gonna have, yes, enable for these systems, but at home you want to enable that if you're gonna run VMs, okay? And then RAID system, yes, I have RAID system enabled. That's going to be under Sata Operation. So Sata is serial ATA, and it's used to interface or connect your hard drive, your HDD, your hard disk drive, which is your storage, your disk storage. Okay. Then we are going to look at the power options. And in the power options, you would see some of the features. So what type of power options are enabled? For me, there's not a lot that's enabled. The only one that I have that's enabled is your USB power share wake support. And it will be named a little bit different from one processor to another, and this option is called S4S5. Okay, so for all of us that's going to be doing support, we want to make sure that we enable something that will be wake support or wake on LAN, meaning that when your network is on, you can actually turn on the systems that are connected. So what it does is it's going to send an electrical signal to all the computers that are connected to your network and wake it up, right? You don't want to go through and turn on 1,000 systems manually by pressing the button. You don't. Because you might be working in, let's say, New York, and you need to turn on something over the internet. You can remote in and you can turn on something in California. And so you can use the wake on LAN option and also wake support option in order to support your system. So that's the only one that I have enabled. And then key lock, NUM lock is enabled, but that's not part of the power option there. Okay. Any questions? Okay, so we are going to click back. Oh, and then we are going to go back to our advanced option. And then we are going to look at your USB configuration. So I have the front port and the back port USB enabled. What about you guys? Should be too, right?
Yeah.
Why should we disable the front USB, you think, in the network, in a business?
somebody could just, it's easy to pop in and then
Yeah.
plug something in there.
Yeah. So if you don't want people to walk by and just put a USB that has malware or something, you can disable. Or if you want employees not to bring in their home USB that has, could be like files that could infect your system, you can disable the front. You can keep the back because usually we use that for mouse, keyboard, and other things, right? So I have front and rear USB ports enabled. Okay, so we can lock it down that way, and you would do that with the BIOS. And then we can go back to advanced, and then we are going to go to support assist. And support assist has ways for us to do OS recovery, right? This also allows us to recover our operating system, and we can set it up on the threshold. So how does the system allow auto OS discovery? Yes, right? And you want to enable that. And then what is the setting for the threshold? That will be 2. On mine, it should say that. I think yours should be similar. And you can change those, right? If you click, you check the option, you can also look at the options and modify it. All right, let's go back to the main. And then we are going to look at the firmware for TPM. And then your UEFI boot path security. So in the new Windows, it requires the UEFI, which is like a replacement of BIOS in the recovery process. We'll talk about that later, where we would set up a boot path. So in the case where if you create a backup, it takes an image of your system and it's going to put it into a location. And we would use that location in order to actually be able to boot. So let me see. I'm sorry, that was under the security thing. So here, everybody. So go to security, and then you would see that right there. UEFI on the bottom, you see, and then the firmware TPM. The firmware TPM is disabled there.
Doesn't the new Windows require TPM to 220?
Yes. So you have to really accommodate the Windows. Now, this is for physical security, the last 3. Okay? That means that when somebody steals your system, right, you can activate the chip control with the TPM, and also your boot path security, you can lock it. Okay? But it's also for recovery process. So those are the settings. Okay, so we need to record that for our answer. Sorry, I'm doing handheld camera on a little thing, so let me scoot my. Oh. Okay, so share screen now. Okay, so firmware TPM, I want to say disable, because they did it here, disable. And then your boot path security, we would say always accept internal HDD. So it's going to use the hard drive inside the system for the path for UEFI. Okay, then we're going to go to boot. Okay, so boot is going to be the security sequence. I'm sorry, the priority sequence. So what do you guys have on your system? You see the boot option? So the first option is going to be to the SSD. That's going to hold the operating system, right? The second option is going to be the USB, which can be, you can put images on that. You can boot it. The third option is going to be here. Let me. Okay, so for those of you, you can see that. Okay, and then I have the SSD first, the USB storage second. Diskette is disabled, but that's if you have like CD-ROM or another drive for optical. And then hard drive is going to be option 4, and then also optical drive at option 5. So you can always change this. So when you first install, sometime if you're using a USB, you can make that a priority. So you just change the sequence, and that's under the boot. Okay. And then I'm going to go ahead. So on the MacBook Pro, yeah, you're not going to have BIOS. You won't have BIOS on the Pro, MacBook Pro. All right, I need to do that. I need to put the share. All right. So list the boot sequence here. I'm just going to do a sum, right? SSD number 1. And then I have USB number 2. Diskette number 3. And then I have HDD number 4. And then optical drive is number 5. Type wrong there. Can the system boot from USB? Yes. Okay. So we can enable boot from USB, and we can also change the priority for USB. Okay. So that's it. Then when you're done, you can just go down to your exit option, which is your arrow key, right? And then you just choose exit, and then your system will press enter or click exit, and then your system will boot. Okay. Now it's going to ask you, do you want to save changes or reset changes or discard changes? I didn't change anything, so I can choose changes. Some of the BIOS, it will ask you to press F10 to save and exit. So you can press F10, the function key, to do that. Okay? All right. Any questions?
We're a bit ahead,
Okay.
but it says, do we count the integrated graphics when we count video adapters?
Yes.
Okay.
See, I told you.
I wasn't sure.
I'm always right.
Thank you.
Okay, so CPU-Z is a free software that we used in the past, and you can still use it today. I know some of your processor comes with software that you can use to manage your processor. Like you can boost it, you can look at the thread, you can do other things with it. So when you use free software, just be careful because you can download other things with it, because that's how they make money, right? So what you want to do is it tells you to visit the website there. And then what you want to do is you want to download the English version. So when you look at the website, right, here it talks about other stuff. Don't click the download continue thing here. That's just add. So we want to use the setup English version for 64 and 32-bit in pink or purple. If you want to get the zip version, which is, if you don't have a lot of drive on your computer, like drive space, we can download the zip version, right? Unless you speak and read Chinese, you can also use the Chinese version, but we are going to do English version. Okay, this one. Okay. And then we are just going to close. And it's going to take you here. And then we're going to download. And it's going to go. And you're going to see the executable there. Okay.
HP graphics.
So make sure that we get the English setup version, 32-bit or 64-bit, and then click download again. And when you finish downloading, going back here, right? The executable, you're going to open it up. And then my Windows firewall tells me that, oh, you want to do this? I'm going to click yes. And then I'm going to accept the license agreement. And I'm going to go next. And then it's going to put it into the default path, which is going to be under program files. And then we're going to go next. And then it's going to give me it says that it's going to have it in the start menu option. That's fine. Go next. And then we can put a desktop icon, and you can always uninstall it later. I'll show you how. And we're going to go next and then click install. Okay. All right. You want to read the README text, which is the instruction, that's fine. You can also do that, or you can just click finish. Here's the README. It talks about, what type of software it is and so on. Okay. So once we ran the executable, we installed the program. We are going to finish the installation, and then we are going to go to our desktop icon, and we are going to open it up. Okay, and keep in mind that this is for your Windows PC. Okay, there are some Mac OS processor clock type of application. You can find some of them, but they are more rare because we don't really overclock the CPU in a Mac Pro, right? All right. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize this. I see a chat question. Okay. Can I show you that at the end, please? Because I wanted to also keep up with everybody. So I'll show you the answer from the beginning at the end. Okay. So we are going to go ahead and look at our icon. Sorry, let me move all of this out of the way. Okay, so here's my CPU ID, and then I'm gonna go ahead and open that up. Okay, now this is your typical window of it. That's the size that how they write the GUI. So I'm using i7 on my laptop, so it's a little different than what you have, and so the model of it is a little bit different than the one on the Alienware. Okay. So what we have is, after we did the installation, we're going to look at the code name. So the code name for mine is going to be Comet Lake-UY. So it's a little bit different than, and if you have a Windows PC, you can use it on your laptop. Comet Lake U-U/Y. And the socket that's used, that's where the processor is plugged in. So you can look at your processor, your CPU ID again, and it's going to tell you the socket. So I'm using socket 1528. And this is important to know because when you're buying motherboard or you're replacing motherboard, you want to make sure that it's the same socket for your processor. Okay, so FCBGA. So I'm going to list that. That's going to be socket 1528.
It's not there.
Yeah. Unless you want to
Scroll up one.
Depending on the processor that you have in the motherboard, it's going to also be different in the socket. Then on the next part, it's going to ask about the max for the thermal design power, your TDP. And here I put a little note that it's used to measure heat that is expected for the underload. So when the CPU have a TDP of 90 watts, then it would expect to output 90 watts worth of heat. So when you have a CPU that has higher wattage, it's going to be hotter. Okay. So that's really important to monitor, because when you are overclocking or you cranking it up to turbo boost it, it's going to run hot. It's going to increase it as it would consume more power. Okay. So going back to this again, we're going to look at the max for the TDP. So as you can see here, I have the max is going to be 15.0 watts on mine. So we are going to specify that it's 15.0 watts. And then how many cores and threads are identified by the application. So now some of them are dual core, quad core, right? Single core. So what you want to do is, now think of core as in like engines for your processor. If you have a quad core, there are 4 little engines that help, handle the task, compared to a single core where it's only one engine doing the work. So what you can do is you can take a look. So for mine, right, let me see here. Here it shows me that I have this, okay? And for the family, for the extended family, that will be 6. Now on the AMD is a little different. The core and the core designs is a little bit different on the AMD side. So just to let you know. Okay. And where else can you find this information? If you go to system information, it also tells you, more in detail. So I have a quad core. You see that here? Okay, but it's a quad dual core, so that's a logical 8 core. So we take 2 and we multiply it by 4. Okay, so we are gonna go ahead and type in 4 physical core and 8 logical core. And then you have all of these tabs that also tells you the details like memory, right? What kind of memory that would be used in the system. So here's the CPU, the core speed, as you can see that it changes. So I have only, I have level 1, level 2, and level 3 cache, and it's much smaller than the one that's shown in your Alienware there. Okay. So the core number is down here, and the threads is 8. It's always going to be multiplied. There's a multiplier that we would use to multiply with the core. So I have an 8 logical core, but the physical core I would have 4. And you can always find that in your OS information as well. Okay, so here's my cache information. What's the largest capacity? I have the 8 megabytes at level 3. Level 3 is always going to be the largest one. The smallest one is always going to be L1. So L3.
Oh, I don't. I'm not.
Any question?
I'm aware of how it works.
Okay. Then we are going to look at the main board. Okay. So main board is here. And who manufactured the motherboards? So on mine, it says ASUS. What about you guys? What does it say for your main board? Anyone? Is it Dell?
With the manufacturer?
Yeah, for the motherboard.
Yeah, it says Alienware.
Okay, so on the Alienware, it says Alienware, but I have an Asus laptop, so it would say Asus, and it would tell me the type, right? Asus Tech. And on the Alienware, it would say Alienware or Dell. Okay, what type of chipset? These are the chips that's going to be on the motherboard. So I have the Comet Lake PCH. So that will be my chipset is the Comet Lake. So on yours, it's a little different. Okay. Is the BIOS version matched with 2A? So I know that the BIOS version is 1.0.0. Okay. Let me see. Yeah, so the BIOS version, it actually has, this is a different system, so I have a different number here, right? But on yours, it should say 1.0.0. So you should say yes here, right? Because yours should match with what you saw earlier. But I'm using the Asus laptop now, so it's a little different. Okay. All right. Then click on the memory. You should see the memory. So this is a good tool for you to look at your hardware inventory from a software level. Okay? Like how much memory you have, what kind of processor you have, how many cores does it have. All of this is also in your system information in Windows 10. So here is my RAM. I only have 16 gig on my laptop. Okay, so, and this is using DDR4. So the type of memory I have is going to be a DDR4, which is very common now, right? Some of the older one would use DDR3. And then I would have the frequency, that will be the speed. So it tells me here that I'm, uncore frequency, but I wanted to look at the DRAM frequency. So I'm at roughly like 1330. So it will say 1330, and that changes here and there. On yours, it's going to be higher on the Alienware. Okay. Okay. On the CL, so here we would also look at the CL, and that will be the clock cycle, that will be 19. Okay. And then, so this is specifically for the RAM. Okay. So I would put down here that will be 19. And again, different on your computer and the Alienware. Okay, then we're going to look at the Spd tab. Okay, so on mine, it only showed that it's going to be in one slot. That's going to be available for the selection, slot number 1, and then slot number 2. There are 2 slots. But on yours, you might have more slots on your motherboard. You might have 4 or 5 slots. Okay. 6 slots, 8 slots. It depends on the board. So 4 is typically the number. So you can also look at the certain slot. So if I'm upgrading RAM, I'm only going to have 2 slots to upgrade with. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, on mine it doesn't. On yours. So who's the manufacturer? Did you guys put this down for number 22? Because I'm not going to be able to do that on my laptop. So.
Oh, Micron Technology.
Micron? Yeah. Okay. And then the module size, it should be 16 gigs, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. 16 and then dual. And then
16 by 2, right? Okay. So I'm using the Alienware, right? Because I can't see that. So the ranks?
Dual.
Dual. And then voltage?
1.2.
1.2 for the RAM? Not bad. Okay. So the voltage is going to be specifically for the RAM, and that's going to be the dual core setting for the ranks. Okay, so it's going to give you the detail also here. but on mine it's slightly different. So all right, look at the graphic tab. And then we want to see the video adapter. So at this point we can look at your GPU. So on the GPU, I have an onboard graphic. So it will say Intel, and that means that it's integrated with the motherboard. And then sometimes graphics can also be built into the processor. So that's why it also says Intel. So it's using that. Now on the Alienware, of course, it's going to be different. What graphic did you guys have?
Intel. It's a Intel Blue UHD graphics 630.
Is there another one? There should be another one.
We also have the 1080.
Yeah, we paid the extra money for the 1080. All right. Okay. So so what we would have is we would then answer the next one. So for the graphic tab, how many video adapters? So on the Alienware, you're gonna have 2, and then the first adapter, that will be your Intel, right?
Yep.
And then the second adapter, that will be your, what is that, NVIDIA, right?
Yeah, NVIDIA GeForce GTX 1080 Ti.
I'll just put the 1080. Everybody knows what that is. Okay, so what's the RAM on that?
11.
11 gigabyte?
Yep.
Okay, so let me highlight this for everybody to see. Yeah.
Okay, 450 for 4 gig.
So this is a DDR5, right, for the VRAM. That's video RAM. Okay.
Yeah, GDDR5 X. Yeah. Yeah, that's the same thing.
All right. Then for the bench, what is your single thread value?
503.6.
503.6. And that varied, right? It changes. And so for those of you who are using this, right, if you click the bench tab, then you can follow the instructions, you can select the processor, and you can bench it. So it's going to give you the thread value. That means that the value that's given for each of the logical core, and then the multi-thread. What did you have? What did you guys get for the multi-core?
3744.2.
3744.2?
Yep.
Okay. And you're on a quad core?
Yeah.
Okay. Quad core with 8 too, right? So, okay, good. And then when you bench test the result, compare the reference with the blue and the purple. That goes for a while though, did it?
It's at 7 to 10.
7 to 10?
Well, oh wait, that's the next one. What? Oh yeah, the result. We saw that bench result was lower for single and higher for multi-thread.
Okay, so bench is lower. Okay, that's good.
Lower in single.
Lower in single core?
Yeah, and then higher with multi.
Higher
Or single thread.
in multi-thread. So that means that when it's working by itself, right, it's slower. But when it's distributing the tasks to all the core, then it's much faster. And that makes sense. That's why they do hyper-threading. All right. Then your stress button, we're going to take, So if you don't have this run, it's okay. You don't have to do a screen capture, but for those of you who can, take a screen capture for the stress button. That takes about 7 minutes or so. That means that you just push it to the max and see how it does, right?
Yeah.
And you want it to see the capability of your processor, and then it's going to give you the result after that. Okay. Yeah, so some of you are finishing that now, and some of you just started it, so just wait a little bit. And we should be, and then when you're done, you close the application, you save your answer, you upload it on Canvas, and you finish with the lab. Okay. All right. Any questions for this part? So I'm not going to be able to do this part right now. Okay. And then, but you have most of the details from that. You can try that on your Windows computer if you like. It's just a software. So, and then for question 6 to 8, let me zoom in a little bit. Let's take this down to 120. I keep typing in the lab, the desktop. As
Perfect.
there you go. Hey,
Where did he go?
is Eduardo here today? He's not here today.
Huh?
Never want that my Bitcoin.
Oh, yeah. That's what
On
we're talking
Zoom?
about.
Where is he at today? He might be at work or something.
Maybe, perhaps. He works weekends.
You're welcome.
If you work weekends, it includes Mondays.
So
Yeah.
hopefully I don't have to re-record this video because sometimes I have to for the lab. All right. Any other questions? So check out the software if you want to use it. I know some of you are finishing, so take a screen capture when you're done, answer the last question, and then upload it. Okay. Then on Wednesday, we're going to do system information where you're going to still gather the same thing using your OS tools. So what's the whole point in this, right? It's because we're touching on CPU, motherboard, and so on. And also I wanted to address some of the things that I saw in your assignment. When you buy the motherboard, you also think about form factor, which is the actual physical size of the motherboard when you chop up the case. They're all like puzzle pieces. Form factor needs to fit with the case. And then we'll touch on the, I'll do a lecture on form factor. What the size is. Okay. A+ will ask you, what's the difference between the mini ATX and an ATX? Right? Physically, it's different in size on how big or wide it is. So make sure that we understand about form factor. We know about socket. We also need to understand about different memory type, cache for your processor, and so on. So this kind of leads us into this chapter, the end of chapter 3, actually. So read the chapter or read the notes. Okay. And then I'll get the videos up. Any question? All right, I'm going to stop recording.